I'm honored to be today introducing and interviewing my neighbor. We live in a small working class neighborhood in Austin called Terrytown. He lives in a much larger house than I live in, but that's because he's an accomplished journalist. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker. He's an author of having won the Pulitzer Prize for Looming Tower. You may not know this, he's also a screenwriter. He wrote for example, the movie The Siege in 1998, and it was only 3 years later that there was an terrorist attack in New York. So I don't want to suggest that they're cause and effect, but let's just say he's a powerful screenwriter. He's also a playwright, and he's a musician. And you can come and see he and his band at one of the worst dives in the world in East Austin. The drinks are cold, the bar is dirty, and the music is fantastic.
I'm going to use that.
Okay, good, excellent. Hey,
the Skylark Lounge.
Yeah, the roof is about 6 foot 4 inches off the ground.
Yeah.
So tall people have to bend down.
Right. Yeah, don't sneeze because the whole thing goes down.
Yeah, and if there's a guy out in the parking lot, give him $5 to watch your car. Otherwise, something bad might happen to you. Anyway, but it's a lot of fun, and all of his friends come and get cheap drinks and loud music. Among his books are Looming Tower, as I mentioned, Going Clear on Scientology, 13 Days in September about the Camp David Accords, The Terror Years. In March, and I'm not saying that it just may be, an accident, but in March of 2020, he came out with a novel that suggested the impossible, which was a global pandemic. A novel that will scare. If you weren't scared by the actual COVID, read the book and you'll be even more scared. And then finally, he's got several books on Texas, God Bless Texas, and then this new book that we're here today to talk about, Mr. Texas, a novel about the Texas legislature. So first of all, let's start. What's the journey of this book?
This actually started back when Ann Richards was governor. And, I had a crush on the Texas House of Representatives.
Talk about weird sexual preferences.
There's that, what's that cooking term when you boil something down to, it's a reduction. It's a reduction of Texas. You have your cotton farmers, you have your, NFL players, you have the mayor, you have somebody who's got $1 billion and somebody who's just getting past the food stamp era, and they're all 150 of them in one room, and it's wonderful. And yet, I'm sure other states have ugly political exchanges, and Texas is not alone in that. But somewhere along the line, we got around to cherishing these assholes. So
one of the reasons we cherish them is the Texas legislature, second most populous state in the union. Its legislature meets for 140 days every 2 years.
Yes,
and we're working to get them there 2 days every 140 years, but we aren't there yet. And then we pay them, much to our disgust, $600 a month. The sons of bitches are lording it over us with our tax dollars.
Can you imagine? So Ann was governor, and I started off, my hero, Sonny Lamb, was a Democrat. And I had written it originally as a screenplay. And at that time, I thought I would stop writing journalism. I would become a movie director. And the only way to do that was to write a screenplay that was so great, and I would insist to be the director. It apparently didn't quite meet that mark. And so a friend of mine, we had a reading of it, and a couple of weeks later he said, "Why don't you make it into a play?" And then the next words out of his mouth were, "We've already rented the theater." The presumption is just so great, So I said, "Well, when are we going to put on this play?" 4 months from now. So I wrote it as a play. We rehearsed it, cast it, and a Broadway producer came down, Margot Lyon, who had done Angels in America and Hairspray. She was just a titan of Broadway. I was so honored. And she said, "It should be a musical." Well, who am I to disagree? So I started writing music with Marcia Ball, who's a great Texas musician, piano player, and songwriter. And then Margot changed her mind. She said, it should be a television show. Okay. So I sold a pilot to HBO. And I thought, here we go. And then they fired my executive and killed all of his projects. So I had no musical, I had no HBO series. But I really dug the music part of it. So I thought, if I've got nothing and I want to do something with it, I'm going to go back to the musical idea. So Marcia and I and my son Gordon, we got together and we wrote 53 songs. It was so much fun. I never had more fun. But then...
At 3 minutes each, that would be like an hour and a half long musical. Assuming that there was no dialogue, just music.
Right, and then comes the pandemic. You know, so our unlikelihood of getting in a Broadway theater had just suddenly become 100%. And so I called my agent. I said, what can I do with this? It's the most interesting project I have. I really want to do something with it. He said, podcast. But look, it kind of makes sense, right? It costs, to start a new musical on Broadway is $20 million. Podcast, you know, you listen to music, why can't you just have a musical? And so I got interested in this, and that's where the 53 songs came from, because it doesn't matter how many songs you have. The more music, the better. And but I then found out that podcasts are supposed to be cheap. You know, they're like you and I are sitting at a table and we have a microphone between us, and that's the whole cost of it. We had, you know, a cast of 20 and a full band and stuff like that. It was like we had built a ship in the basement and now we can't get it up the steps. You know, we just figured we had miscalculated. And finally I thought, you know, I write books for a living. So it occurred to me that I would write the novel, and that's where that came from.
So the long and short of it is it failed as a music
movie,
music a show, musical, podcast, and so you were forced to put it in a paper.
You could put it uncharitably in that.
Yeah, okay. Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about to set the scene for the book, because we want them to go out and buy it, because otherwise they're going to foreclose on his house, and it would be terrible if that happened. And he's got a sick dog that he needs to get veterinary care. And his wife hopes to go visit their children before she passes. So anyway, you need to buy the book, and he'll autograph it for you. But
absolutely true.
Exactly. Yeah. So this starts with a funeral. Walter Dunn, I guess he's a conservative Democrat representing the Big Bend area of far west Texas, which is larger than most states and is one of 150 congressional districts, led state house districts, the 74th district. He's died, and there's a fixer named LD Sparks shows up, and he's interested in making certain that he gets a candidate, and he stumbles across a candidate, Sonny Lamb and his wife Lola, and he has just made an ass out of himself by taking a cow to auction and buying his own cow at auction. So everybody thinks he's a complete idiot, and then he gets involved with a cute filly named Coco. Take it from there.
Yeah. I want to tell you about how I got some of these stories, because so many of them are actually true. And the thing is, with Texas politics, it's hard to stretch the truth because it's so bizarre. And when I first started this project, I went into after Ann had lost to W, thanks to you.
One of my better moments, I have to admit. The Speaker of the House, Pete Laney, was a cotton farmer from the Panhandle, and the Lieutenant Governor was Bob Bullock, and they're both Democrats, and George was the governor, and I think it was one of the best periods in our political history because there was a sense of comedy and civility, and as in fact, when Bush ran for president, they both endorsed him, which was, you know, you can imagine that. But anyway, I went in to meet the Speaker, Pete Laney, who was one of the greatest figures, just the sweetest guy. And the legislators loved him so much, they used to call him Dick Nose. But anyway, I sat down with the Speaker, and I said,
so I've got this character who's a rancher out in West Texas, and I just have to know some things about what kind of things he would want to do. Like I've got this lobbyist, L.D. Sparks, who's trying to subvert his career, just destroy him. And what could he do? Well, you could put a toxic waste dump in his district, and that would screw him up. And I thought, wow, I would never have thought of that. And I said, well, you guys hunt, right? I was thinking about having a hunting scene. Yeah, I don't myself, but I have friends who do. What do they hunt? Pigs. Hey, they hunt pigs. They hunt pigs. Yeah. How do you hunt pigs? Honey, get Sharp on the line. This is John Sharp, who is now the chancellor of the Texas A&M, but was then the comptroller of the state. He says, Sharp, got a young man in my office. He wants to know how you hunt pigs. Well, we go out at night in our tennis shoes, and we carry pistols, and we put the dogs after them. And, the dogs will go after a pig's nuts. And so the pig will back up against a tree, and then you just take your pistol and pop him in the eye. And I thought, wow, these are the Democrats. this is really scary.
These are the not progressive Democrats. Let me be clear about that.
Well, after that, I was so in love. I was just, you run into a guy like that, and you, as a writer, you think, I want to embrace this. And so that's what kept me going all those years. Is there were some stories I had to leave out. Like, you remember Mike Martin?
Oh, yeah.
When I was back
a Republican, I hasten to add.
Oh, yeah, you got him elected.
No.
Back in his incarnation, when I was taking it out to Hollywood, they were, the criticism this is not so plausible. And one of the characters I had in there was based on Mike Martin, who was running for re-election, but he wasn't doing very well. So naturally, he had his cousin shoot him to get the sympathy vote. And so you play the margins.
Yeah. So, he was from East Texas. That explains a lot. We call that living behind the pine curtain. Yeah. And they're all crazy out there.
Well, the Texas Rangers caught on to what was going on, and they tracked him down at his mom's house in Longview. And he was hiding in the stereo cabinet. And Molly Ivins said he always did want to be the speaker. So there's much to draw from.
Yeah. There was a state senator close to. He actually had Laney's district inside his Senate district. We have something like 38 members of the U.S. House, and we have 31 state senators. So their districts are larger than congressional districts. And this guy was a new member, and it was back in the old days. So this is like in the 70s, and maybe the early 80s. And the guy comes up to him, lobbyist, and says, I need your vote in the committee and on a particular measure. And he said, well, I'm not really interested in the issue. What's in it for me? And the lobbyist said, well, how about $200? And the guy said, done, and gave him the $200. And vote came up in the committee, and the new senator from West Texas voted against him. Came up afterwards and said, God damn it, you told me you'd vote for it, and you didn't vote for it. He said, well, you promised me $200. Anybody who think that they could have my vote for $200 deserves what they get.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't call it corrupt.
No. We did have we have had reforms. Like it used to be that members of the Texas House and Senate got a postage budget for mail back to their constituents, and it was in the form of postage stamps. They would just give you sheets of postage stamps. And one member from West Texas didn't have very much in the way of correspondence and kept accumulating over 5 or 6 or 7 sessions, 2-year terms, a bunch of stamps, and then took them to the post office, turned them in for cash, and bought a pickup. After that, they started saying, well, you have to deliver your mail to the central post office, and we'll run them through a machine. But I thought it was a very creative use of constituent services.
Yeah.
It's better for me to go see them in person than it is to write them.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about. When I was a kid in Dallas, Texas was blue and California was red. And, it's just
We got the better part of the deal.
Well, no single individual has done more to change American politics than Karl. And it started with Texas. And I don't approve all of those changes. But it's...
You're a writer. You're an artistic type. You're not supposed to approve common sense conservative answers. You live out there on the internet.
So, but the writing about a state like Texas, I feel a certain responsibility because, you know, the growth projections of Texas are that by 2050 it will be double the size, and it'll be larger than California and New York combined. So as important as Texas is in our political system now, it'll be decisive. And I don't think a lot of people in Texas have taken on the responsibility that comes with being the most important state in the Union.
I think that's right. Let's get back to a little bit to your.
Okay.
So you're getting away from it. You need to tantalize this audience.
That's right.
So you've got L.D. Sparks, the evil Machiavellian political
Right.
consultant figure, who's not based on me, incidentally, because he's large, overweight, and is a lobbyist, and I'm not large, overweight, and never been a lobbyist. So, but anyway, I know what you were trying to do with L.D. Sparks.
Okay, yeah.
So Sparks is looking for a candidate. He's got this hapless local. Why has the hapless local become his candidate? And then what launches to Austin? Don't give away all the good stuff. Just get us to Austin and tell us what the dilemma is that he faces there. But what happens? How does he get there?
Well, first of all, he's a hero and a goat at the same time, because as you mentioned, he bought his own steer at auction because he didn't want to see him turned into a hamburger. But LD finds out that he has never actually voted, which is incalculably valuable because you can write a tablet of who this guy is because there's no proof he was anything else. So he loves the idea and he thinks he can use him as his pet vote. And actually, Sonny has an agenda. He's living out in West Texas where there's a drought. And everybody they know is, there are hard times for ranchers and farmers, really hard. They're going bust everywhere. And yet underneath their feet is this vast aquifer. The only problem is it's saline, it's salty. So he conceives the idea of having a desalination plant that would eliminate the problem of drought in West Texas. And this is what's really driving him. And LD doesn't appreciate that this guy has his own agenda. He just thinks that he can run down the highway bill and whatever else and just have him sign it. So eventually they become titanic enemies. And that's the axis of the story.
But how does LD get him elected? Why does he pick him as a candidate?
Well,
because he is the hapless guy, but the guy, he's afraid. Look, in Texas, among ranchers, favorite animals become like your pet. I mean, it's like your dog. So you wouldn't take your dog and sell it to be made into dog meat. So, you take your best steer and you don't want to lose him. You don't want him to be made into steaks.
Well, there is a very attractive candidate running for the same office who's much more qualified than Sonny Lamb is, far more. And she was an Iraqi war veteran, and she was a county commissioner, and she has everything you would want in a candidate. And but LD is so underhanded. That's not going to stop him. He guarantees that Sonny will win. But one thing going in his favor is that somewhere way, way up in his family tree, he had an ancestor who died at the Alamo. So this registers in...
Well, doesn't he also undertake a heroic act almost by accident?
There's a fire. And, you all are familiar with fires out here, I hear. In West Texas, there tend to be brush fires that just sweep across the prairie and knock down anything in there. And there are no fire departments. So everybody is a volunteer fireman. And Sonny, he spots this fire. All the neighbors come and they use...
takes a half an hour to drive from his ranch across the valley to the other ranch. So, I mean, this is part of Texas where people do not live close together. I mean, I'm serious. We have this used to be the heart of a congressional district, one congressional district that was larger than the state of Pennsylvania. And it's still, I mean, There's a town called Alpine, and the next town is Marfa, and it's 45 minutes driving 70 miles an hour. There's another, town northwest of there, again, another 45 minutes driving at 70 miles an hour before Davis. My wife's family had a ranch in Valentine, Texas, which used to have 10,000 people and is down to 200, site of the Katherine Johnson Memorial Library that my wife built for her mother. But nobody lives out here, so your neighbor is 10 miles away.
Yeah.
So Sonny looks across this long stretch of brush and cactus and sees that the Miller Ranch is on fire.
You have to rush out there. Everybody has their emergency material, and the way you fight a grass fire like that is with burlap bags dumped into the stock pond, and so it's not easy to do. And so as he's out fighting the fire with the other neighbors, he hears this little girl screaming, and the barn has caught fire, and her horse is in the barn. And so he rushes in to rescue her. And, the place is inflamed, the horse is rearing, and he manages to get on the horse to take her out and get her safely into her mother's arms. Then he goes back in to rescue the horse. He puts a wet burlap bag over his head to keep his hair from catching on fire, and he manages to ride this Palomino out of the stable. And it happens that there's a news truck there, and it catches this valuable piece of film.
He's riding cocoa out of a blazing fire. What better opening for your I hereby declare my candidacy.
Yeah, well, LD sees that, and it's like, I got it. He doesn't know who he is. He just knows that he can elect him.
All right. So there's bipartisan sex in the book. There are twists and turns worthy of a coked-up Hollywood screenwriter, which I guess he used to be, except for the coked up. But it's well worth reading, and it is marvelous about you have mined all of our recent experiences for the Texas lore about the legislature, which really is an incredibly bizarre place.
I don't want this to stop without talking about Bob Bullock, who's the inspiration for Big Bob Bigby, who's the Speaker of the House. And Bob Bullock was actually the lieutenant governor, but in the minds of Texans, he was married 5 times.
Twice to the same woman.
Yeah, that's right. So we give him 4.5.
Yeah.
And he was an alcoholic. He had terrible problems. He was really, in many ways, an awful man.
He was Secretary of State, and he was at a party and got terribly drunk. And so he got in his car, in the back seat of his car, to sleep it off. And the next morning woke up and the car was driving north out of Austin at 65 miles an hour on IH-35, and he realized he'd gotten in the wrong car, popped up out of the back seat and said, "Hi, I'm Bob Bullock, your Secretary of State. Can I help you?" He used to have guns all over the place, over the place.
Yeah,
and if you ask him why, he'd said it's what drunks have.
My favorite story was told at his funeral. He became friends with the guy that ran the parking at the Capitol, and
so around the Texas State Capitol, they used to hire former state government employees, and they called them the squirrel guards. And you could literally, until security became an issue, you could park your car 10 feet from the entrance to the Texas State Capitol if the squirrel guards let you. But having a relationship with the squirrel guards, and the lieutenant governor and the speaker vied for being who was going to be most powerful and in charge of the squirrel guards.
Well, at the funeral, the squirrel guard was talking about how Bullock would help people through the 12 steps because he'd been through it a number of times himself. And
like 144 steps.
Yeah, well, he said one thing that the governor could never do was the step where you forgive yourself. But he would bring in, we'd hear about people in the legislature that were having trouble, and he would call them in. And, he seemed like a really big man, but he wasn't that big, but he just had this presence, and he would say, I heard the news about how hard things are for you right now. I've been through it myself. I've been where you are. And I just have you ever thought about ending it all? Just get it over with. And then he reached into his briefcase where he kept one of his guns and says, here, we'll clean it up. But, you're going to do it, just go ahead and do it and get it over with. Nobody ever pulled the trigger. But apparently it had a transformative effect, because he's looking at the gun on the governor's desk, and you think, maybe I won't be whining as much as I was before.
I had friends who went to work for him in their 30s, and I've never seen. He was a tech guy, so before people had beepers, he got beepers. So all of his staff had beeper, and if your beeper went off, I've never seen grown men immediately break out into sweat and start running as quickly as the boss wants to see you. Bam!
Yeah.
And he had a volcanic temper.
Yeah, he did.
And he was the most powerful figure in the state government, because the lieutenant governor of Texas, unlike most lieutenant governors, actually presides over the Senate, assigns the committees, and recognizes members. You cannot be recognized on the floor of the Senate without the lieutenant governor saying, you're recognized to speak. And he knew how to use power.
Yeah, he did. But the thing that made people forgive him is that he loved Texas, and everybody knew it. And, he'd get teary about it, and also it didn't matter too much to him what party you were in.
Talent mattered.
Yeah.
Bush is like, Bullock was dubious of him. He thought he's a country club Republican. I don't know what to make of the guy. He was happy in a way that he got elected, because he had fallen out with Ann Richards over the question of education. There was a famous meeting in their conference room, and Bullock is the only person there other than the governor's staff, and they're talking about school finance issue. And he's listening to this, and it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for maybe a couple hours. And he's getting increasingly angry because nothing is constructive is being done. And finally he gets up, throws down his papers on the desk, and says, God damn it, I know more of my left nut than I've heard from this whole bunch of other goddamn blah, blah, blah. Walked out of the room and never again came to the governor's office. And so Bush gets elected governor in an upset. Her personal popularity was 62% on election day. And one of the first things Bush does is he goes to see Bullock privately, arranged by Rusty Kelly of Austin. He's the nice LD Sparks. Yeah. And Bush says, I want to work with you. And they start having, he says, why don't you, the speaker, and I get together every week to talk about what's going to happen during the 140 days and see if we can't find some common ground. And so he invites them. The first meeting is held at the governor's mansion for breakfast, and they have a good meeting. And afterwards, Bullock says, this is the last goddamn time we're coming to this fucking place. And Bush says, why? And he said, this food ain't edible. This is, where's the bacon? What is this goddamn stuff your cook is making? And we're going to have, the governor and lieutenant governor have apartments in there. He says, so we're going to be meeting at Pete's or mine, but we ain't eating this shit anymore. So they start meeting, and of course it's, bacon and, biscuits and gravy and, completely unhealthy stuff. And they start having these meetings. And Bush is the new governor. And the governor's mansion is like a block away. So he would, being the health nut that he is, would walk over to the governor's mansion for lunch. And the press figured this out, journalists like Larry did. And so they'd start bushwhacking him. And so after one of these meetings, they said, what are you all going to do about X? And Bush said, well, we've been talking about it, and I think we've reached an agreement that we're going to do Y on this particular issue. Bullock heard about this and went nuts. He said, God damn it, do I have another press hound on my hands? Do I have somebody who all he cares about is getting in front of the media? I had that with Ann, I'm not going to have it with this goddamn country club Republican. And so he said, I'm going to screw him on a major issue we had. We were trying to get medical liability reform with caps on damages for pain and suffering, which was really important. We were hemorrhaging doctors. Trial lawyers were enormously powerful. There were allies. One of his closest friends was the big lobbyist for the trial lawyers, and we'd reached an agreement about it. And so what he was going to do was welsh on the agreement. And so Bush heard about this, and that he was going to take out his vengeance. And so the next week, the next Monday, they met for breakfast. Bush walks over to Bullock and kisses him full on the lips. And Bullock's like, God damn, what the hell is that about? Bush said, well, if you're going to blank me, you got to kiss me first. And he said, I know you're upset with me. I know I made a mistake, and I'm not going to make the mistake again. And Bullock said, okay. And I went to see Bullock, who was dying of cancer. He smoked a lot, and he abused himself a lot over the years. And it was 1999. And he was catheterized, lying in his bed, smoking a cigarette, lighting the next one with the last one, which is how he smoked cigarettes. And Pinky Albaugh, Joe Albaugh, who was the 6'6" tall, 300-pound, campaign manager for Bush, chief of staff, and I are meeting with him, and he's telling us that he wants Bush to get elected, and so Bush needs to be president, so he doesn't need to get involved in this state issue, leave it alone, blah, blah. Calls his wife, Jan, in and says, Jan, I want you to promise me in front of Joe and Carl that you're going to go to the Republican convention next year if I'm not alive, and in my name endorse George Bush for president. Yeah. And he was dying, and he wanted to make certain that his friend got elected. Yeah,
that was another era, right?
It was, and he loved Texas. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. This is weird. I'm going to apologize, but we're kind of friends now, right? I'm going to sing one of my songs. But it's
there won't be friends after
that.
That's
right. That's right. But this is in the book. You'll see Big Bob's on his deathbed, and he and Sonny becomes his protege. Having this last scene. So in the musical version of it, this is Big Bob on his, he's asked Sonny to say some words at his service, and he sings, I've been round the world in my service days, been in French cafes, seen Russian plays. I ticked every one off my bucket list. There can't be too much I missed. You got your temples of Egypt, your fountains of Rome. You could fit them all in the Astrodome. But no matter wherever I roam, there's only one place I'll ever call home. Texas, you've got to love her. There's no place else I'd rather be. It's one of a kind, it's a state of mind. That's why I love Texas. It's not just my home, it's me. Come see the musical.
All right, buy the book. Now, I got two more subjects I want to talk about in the 11 minutes and 48 seconds we got.
Yeah.
You got the 100th anniversary of the New Yorker is coming up.
Next week.
Next week, and you've got a special article in there that one of the things about Larry is, if you haven't figured it out, he's incredibly versatile. So tell us about the article you got coming up in next week's magazine.
This is the strangest story. It came from, I was walking with a friend of mine whose mom works in Catholic prison services. And she told me this story. There's 7 women on Texas death row. And there was this Catholic deacon who's a cattleman in Belton, Texas. And part of his ministry is the women's prisons in Gatesville. There are 6 prisons in Gatesville and 5 for women. We have a lot of criminals in Texas. And so his bishop says, I'd like for you to go, minister to the women in these prisons. And one of the guards comes up to him and says, there's a woman on death row who'd like to receive communion. So he goes over to death row and he meets Linda Carty, one of the 7 women. And so he regularly includes her in his ministry. And then she says, there are other women that would like your attention, And so gradually, these 7 women on the row, 6 of them become Catholics. And he says they're like feral cats. They're killers, right? But they don't get along. It's funny, some of them have been there for 30 years. So their real sentence is to get along with each other, which they can't do. And so this brilliant idea occurs to him. And he goes over to this convent in Waco and knocks on the door. And these are contemplative nuns. They pray and philosophize, but they're quiet, and they rarely go out. And he knocks on the door and come in, and he says, "Sisters, there's some women that live very similar lives to you, but they live in community, but they don't know how to. And I would like for you to, go over and talk to them and give them some help." "Oh, okay, where are they?" "Well, they're on death row." "Oh, we don't get out very much." But they decide they will go one time. They've been going every month for 3 years. And the spiritual exchange between these condemned women and these nuns is so profound. I have rarely been as challenged as a writer by the force of what they're all dealing with. Anyway, it comes out Monday, and it's.
So I know some of you get New Yorker because of the cartoons. Next week, find it on the newsstand or get online, because this is going to be great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one other thing you got coming out, as long as we're selling your written achievements here. So your next novel is about a half Irish, half Palestinian FBI agent who teams up with a hardline Israeli detective to investigate the murder of the Israeli police chief in, of all places, our new resort on the Mediterranean, Gaza. Tell us a little bit about your book, Human Scale.
The Human Scale. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East in my career. And so this novel was a way of getting some stuff off my chest. I have, I think, equal measures of compassion and anger at both sides. And so I thought it interesting to write about characters who are living this, from different perspectives. And I was in Hebron, which is near Gaza, but it's in the West Bank. And one of the very first settlements, Kira Arba, is right there. And I spent time going into the settlement, and I'd been in Gaza before. I decided that this was, if Graham Greene or Hemingway were alive, they would be drawn to a story like this. And I thought, this is a story that I have never really heard before. What do people who are living on the West Bank and having to encounter each other? And I started out my career in the race relations reporter, covering the civil rights movement. I had never seen such hostility in my lifetime between two populations. The American civil rights movement was profound. But, the stuff that you had to see sometimes was just horrifying. Doesn't compare with what you see in that region. So in 2023, I was in Hebron, and I was talking to a peace activist, and in the middle of our conversation, he was assaulted by an Israeli soldier right in front of me. And I was with a Belgian photographer who videoed it, and we posted it online. But it was really shocking. That kind of thing had never happened to me before. And at one point, he picked up the peace activist by his neck and threw him down on the ground, and his head missed a curb by an inch. And, he could have been killed at that moment. And so anyway, that fueled my thinking about how I have to, deal with this. And then October 7th happened. And I rewrote the novel, and it ends on October 7th. So I imagine that it will arouse some opinions, but I just had to treat it somehow, because I'm about the same age as Israel. And, everybody talks about how it is impossible to solve this problem. But in my lifetime, the impossible problem of apartheid, of the Soviet Union, of having a black president, all those things would never happen. They all happened. But this dilemma keeps going on. And honestly, it's time for a resolution. And have my own thoughts about how that might be resolved, but anything is better than the occupation.
And you've lived in, what, Egypt?
I lived 2 years in Egypt when I was a conscientious objector during Vietnam, and I taught at the American University in Cairo. I think I may have been the only one who wasn't a CIA agent. So I spent a lot.
That's called distraction. You've now confirmed you were a CIA agent.
No, not at that time. No, it was.
And the book comes out when?
March 11th.
Human scale. Let's hope the same effect doesn't take that we had at the end of October, and that we have which led directly to a major worldwide pandemic. I'd hate to see what this leads to. So please, whatever you do, make it benign.
Well, I think it's already happened, and so the only thing that I'd like for people to do is to begin to understand other perspective. You know, nobody's going to find peace unless they can project their mind into the heart of the other, and that's where we are blocked, and that's what I hope that this novel will hurdle over and help people see the other perspective.
Good. All right, so your assignments are buy and read Mr. Texas, and then Human Scale comes next, and then for fun reading, if you haven't read it, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Looming Tower, how the rise of Al-Qaeda leads to 9/11. At the back of the room are two people that I want you not to talk to and to avoid at all cost. Karen and Scott Ogden, the two people back there in the back. They will claim to have been high school friends of mine since high school. They will mislead you about my background. They will tell untruths. Do not, under any circumstances, talk to either one of them. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you,
Carl.
Carl.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, sir.